For more than a year now, Christians and Muslims have been locked in a vicious conflict in the Central African Republic, also called the C.A.R. The situation is so bad that the United Nations is referring to it as ethnic religious cleansing. And some say that what's happening in the C.A.R. bears stark reminders to the genocide in Rwanda 20 years ago. The Central African Republic is a landlocked country with about 4.6 million people. It's mainly Christian, with a Muslim minority. A French colony, it has had a series of unstable governments since it won independence in 1960. It's one of the poorest countries in Africa. In March of last year, the country was plunged into chaos when the president was ousted by the C.A.R, a coalition of mostly Muslim rebels. Muslim fighters then committed atrocities against the Christians. French troops arrived late last year, forcing the Muslim fighters to retreat. In January, the Muslim president stepped down. For months now, Muslims have been targeted by Christian militias called the anti-Baleka, who are bent on revenge. The violence has resulted in thousands of deaths, and the United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that about 1 million people have been forced to flee their homes. About 60% of them are children. Meanwhile, French troops and African peacekeepers have been unable to stop the violence. Joining me now from Paris to discuss the current situation in the Central African Republic is Martin Zagele. He was Prime Minister of the country from 2001 to 2003. Mr. Zagele, this is one of the most brutal conflicts the world has seen. Britain's Guardian newspaper reporting that children's throats have been slit, villages have been razed, and young men have been thrown to crocodiles. That's how vicious it is. You are talking to a world audience right now. Can you give us an overview of how this conflict started?
I would like to thank you because I have the opportunity to speak to your auditors, to the people and auditors from America, and it is important to know that what is happening in our country is due to the collapse of a country, of a state. We have really failed to build a state established on the law and order, because the things raised after the last elections, the elections have been very badly led, and then after some kind of rebellions, political rebellions, military rebellions began in the country, and mostly in the northeastern part of the country, the regions which were usually forgotten by the central power of our country. And then after, when they take power, they have no ability to rule and to govern a country. And they start very huge violations of human rights. And then after, some people who usually are in the villages, and their main duty is to protect people from highways men, highways criminals and so on. They aggregate and then fight against C.A.R. And it's why at some time when we see what happened in our country, it looked like a confessional conflict, but it's not confessional, since there is no Christian hierarchy who call to fight Muslim people, and there is no Muslim hierarchy who call to fight against Christian people. Is instrumentalization of political conflicts between people who lost power and people who gain power.
Okay, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has warned that this conflict is so vicious that it could spiral into genocide and effectively cause a partition in the country. There has been talk of ethnic cleansing. How bad is the situation?
As I try to explain right now, is not. I don't think that is a confessional conflict, because if it is a confessional conflict, it seems that it is that people who lead religious communities call their members to fight against others. It is not the case. The case is that, to be frank, to be direct, former President General Bozize, when he lost power by the rebellion of C.A.R, which was mostly Muslims, he called people to fight against Muslims because he said that Chad backed the Muslims of C.A.R, and then C.A.R overthrow him. And then people fight against Muslim because for the people, Muslims are both Seleka. They are all Seleka. It's why it gives that confessional aspect to the country, to the conflict. But fundamentally, it's a political problem. It's a problem of alternance, of political alternance, which has been failed because the country has failed. The country is out of the right way of building democracy and building state in the country. It's why last December there were many problems in the country. Many people have been killed. Yes, 1 or 2 million people have been displaced from their homes. Many people have fled from to the other countries. It is true, but it's not It's not ethnical conflict. It's not confessional conflict. It's instrumentalization of poor people, of very poor people, by politicians who lost power, and they want to come back to power by fighting people who look like Muslim or Christian or so on.
Okay, you call it a political problem. What is the current government under Catherine Samba Panza doing now to resolve this conflict?
I think it's very important to point out that Madame Samba Panza has no power, you know, since she has no armed forces under her directions. He has no, it's a king without kingdom, without power, without nothing. There is no army in our country, no police, no administration, no local administration. How can she do to govern the country? You see, you know that in every country in the world, you have to have law and order. You have to respect order in order to build the economy, to build living, good living for all our inhabitants, and so on. If there are no order, if you are nobody to maintain the order in our country, in your country, what can you do exactly? Because international forces, they are there by the mandate given by the United Nations Resolution 2127. It's right, but there cannot be in all the country. So I think it's very important for the international opinion to know that we are in the country without army, and it's important to give the means to that government to have some armed forces, armed personnel with them to help them to put security in the main part of the country, because the country is greater than France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Together, it's a big country with only 4.5 billion inhabitants, as you put it at the beginning of our talk. But if the country is great, if it is not well inhabited, so you need more means to cover the country, to control the country, because we have border with 6 countries, and all the 6 countries has also internal problems. So we are like a sponge. A sponge will carry all the water sprangling from the other countries.
Okay, Mr. Zgela, you talk about international forces being in C.A.R. There are French forces there. There are African peacekeeping forces there. And as you just pointed out, they can't be all over the country. But even in those parts of the country where they are deployed, why have they been so ineffective in stopping this violence?
There are many things to do at the same time. The first thing is to apply without discussion, without ambiguity, the mandate given by the United Nations resolution. All people who are with arms, with guns, has to be disarmed, without exception. If you have militias from Anti-Balaka or Seleka with arms, with heavy guns in the country, and the state has no army, no police, how can peace be settled? So I think that the first thing to do is to disarm people, to applicate the mandate given by the United Nations resolution very, very strongly. And after since the resolution of United Nations has forbidden to the country to import guns and to build an army, I think we have to change the things. We have to discuss with the United Nations to help the country to have an army. Since the country has no army, the government can do nothing to help international forces to bring peace back. Even if the peacekeeping mission came in next September. There are 12,000 people only. They cannot control and patrol all the big country has, as explained a few minutes ago.
You know, you tell us that there is no law and order, the government has no control, international forces that are in the country cannot stop the violence. It sounds and seems like the Central African Republic is a failed state. Is it a failed state?
Yeah, I think that the country is a failed state, and it started very, very far in the past. You know, you are pointed when you resumed at the beginning of our talk that since our independence, we have we have faced many problems, and I think we have a real problem of nation building and state building. And I think the peacekeeping mission has not only to stop at the recovery of security problems. They have to go faster. They have to go to help the country they have to help Central African government, Central African people to rebuild the state, to rebuild a nation, because the problem between Muslims and Christians and so on are created artificially, because citizenhood is not very, very strong in our country. We have to learn to live in our country as citizen of a country before being Muslim or Christian or so on.
You know, according to the United Nations, hundreds of thousands of people in the Central African Republic have been displaced. There are tens of thousands of people who fled to neighboring countries. Malaria has broken out. HIV has broken out as well. There are no access to medicines. What can you tell us about the humanitarian situation in the country?
What is happening in our country is very, very hard to see. It's very hard to monitor. You know, when you come at the international airport of Bangui, with the single airport, international airport in a country, in the main city of Bangui, in the field of the airport, you have many thousand people living there in a very hard situation. You have not to go in the south country to see that. It's at the airport when your plane is taking down. So I think our country is a very harm situation, a very difficult situation. Many people are living in the bush like animals. There are no good water. Women are giving lives in wild savannas like animals, and it's very hard. And when you go to Chad, Sudan, Cameroon, and so on, you have many Central African people living there with very, very great difficulty. So it's why I think that the purpose to give the government the means to restart the army, the national army, police, and so on, to resettle administration in local cities inside the country is a very important goal to reach very quickly. Because if you have security in the villages and inland and town, you can bring people back in their villages, in their living areas, and I think peace will come back very quickly. If not, I'm fearing that things will go very bad in the future.
Martin Zagale, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much.
We are going to take a break right now. When we come back, a Hollywood actor and activist talks about other flashpoints in Africa and what's being done to ease the pain and suffering there. Stay with us here on The Heat.